Hey everyone, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, get comfortable, it's time to dive into a chilling tale. I found the tunnel by accident on the fourth day. That is the short version people would expect if this were one of those stories where a man stumbles into a secret place and suddenly becomes untouchable. That is not what happened. By the fourth day, nobody was untouchable. Not the police, not the National Guard, not the people who had supplies, not the people with training, and not the people like me who spent most of our lives working around things buried under cities that everybody else forgot were there. My name is Nolan Mercer. I was 34 when it started, and before everything fell apart, I worked as a utility mapping technician for a civil engineering subcontractor in Cincinnati, Ohio. My job was not exciting. I read old municipal plans, compared them with modern survey data, walked alleys and basements and access corridors, and tried to tell contractors what was actually under the street before they tore into it with a saw or a backhoe. Water mains, telecom conduits, storm drains, abandoned steam lines, capped service tunnels, old vaults, dead electrical runs, forgotten chambers under sidewalks, that kind of thing. Cities are full of buried decisions. Most of them stay buried because nobody has the budget or the reason to clean them up. That is why I knew something about the ground under Central Parkway before most people ever thought to look. When the outbreak started, I was in a records room below a municipal building annex near downtown, scanning a set of paper drawings from the late 1920s. The plans were tied to a resurfacing job that kept getting delayed because nobody wanted to sign off on work above unknown voids. Cincinnati has a reputation for that. Beneath parts of the city are old brewery tunnels, hillside cellars, utility passages, abandoned basements, and, most famously, the incomplete subway under Central Parkway. Most people know the headline version. They do not know how many unofficial connections get added over decades by maintenance crews, emergency retrofits, utility crossings, and contractors who take the easiest route because somebody above them wants a job finished by Friday. At 9:12 a.m., my supervisor, Jeff Rawlings, stuck his head into the room and told me there was some kind of police incident near Government Square and that I should probably wrap up early. Jeff was 56, ex-Navy, bald, careful with paperwork, the kind of man who never used one word where three would do. He had his phone in his hand and kept refreshing a local station website. "What kind of incident?" I asked. He shook his head. "Transit disruption, violence, maybe more than one scene." "That vague, huh?" "That vague," he said. Then he looked at the drawing spread across my table and tapped a yellowed sheet with the back of his knuckle. "Take photos before you go. I don't trust the scanner software not to eat something." I did. That was one of the better decisions I made. By noon, downtown was closing in on itself. Buses stopped running on normal schedules. People were leaving offices in groups, talking too loudly into phones that were still working just well enough to spread bad information faster than good information. A rumor would arrive, mutate, then pass through a crowd like weather. There was an active shooter at the courthouse. No, it was contaminated food at Findlay Market. No, it was drug violence in Over the Rhine. No, it was some kind of seizure outbreak in the transit hub. By 2 in the afternoon, there were videos everywhere. People attacking strangers. Responders pinning people down who did not stay pinned. Crowds breaking and reforming. Cars abandoned at angles that made no sense. Sirens in every direction. I drove north toward Clifton, then turned back when I hit a line of cars jammed across an intersection with nobody directing anything. I spent nearly an hour trying to get 6 blocks. At 3:40 p.m., I pulled into a surface lot near the office again, thinking stupidly that being near plans, tools, and people I knew was better than sitting in traffic waiting to get boxed in. Jeff was still there. So was Teresa Kim, our project coordinator. He who lived over in Newport and had decided the bridges were a bad idea. Teresa was 38, sharp, Efficient, the kind of person who could keep 6 separate jobs straight in her head and still remember everybody's coffee order. She had kicked off her heels and was wearing a pair of fluorescent yellow survey boots we kept for muddy sites. "You come back for fun?" she asked when I walked in. "Couldn't get out," I said. Jeff was standing in the break room doorway, looking at a wall-mounted television with the sound muted. The local feed showed a helicopter shot of I-71 with lanes stopped in both directions. A lower third banner kept changing language every few minutes. Emergency declaration, shelter in place, travel advisory, avoid contact with symptomatic persons, law enforcement activity ongoing. You think this burns out fast?" I asked. Jeff did not answer right away. "No." That word changed the room. We locked the front entrance before dusk, not because we had any plan, but because everybody does something with their hands when the news gets bad enough. There were 8 people in the building by then. Me, Jeff, Teresa, a survey crew chief named Malik Dorsey, a junior CAD tech named Evan Phelps, 2 women from accounting, and the night janitor, Mr. Lugin, who had been with the building for so long nobody knew his first name. Malik was the only one carrying a firearm legally that I knew of, a compact 9mm he kept locked in his truck because he sometimes worked in rough areas before dawn. He went out once to retrieve it and came back pale and breathing hard. "What happened?" Teresa asked. "Parking lot's not safe," he said. "I got the pistol. I left everything else." He sat down at the conference table and set the handgun on the surface without drama. Not a threat, not a show, just an object that had become relevant in the last 10 minutes. The first night was noise. Helicopters, screaming somewhere out on the avenue, tires, glass, alarms, the deep thump of something heavy hitting the side of a vehicle, then a long period after midnight when the city sounded too empty. Phone networks clogged and thinned and clogged again. My sister Leah, who lived in Covington, texted at 11:18 p.m., "Stay inside. People are biting." I thought she was hysterical until I saw the same phrasing from 3 different numbers. By morning, and the building across from us had 3 broken windows and a bloodless handprint on the lobby glass at shoulder height. That detail stayed with me because it looked ordinary, not theatrical, just a human hand where it should not have been. The second day, a police cruiser rolled through the block around 8 a.m. with a loudspeaker telling everyone to remain inside and avoid all physical contact. The officer's voice sounded flat, exhausted, almost bored with panic. No one came to check buildings. No one distributed anything. At noon, we watched 2 men fight over bottled water in the convenience store across the street. 10 minutes later, there were 6 people in that fight. Then the camera feed died. Malik wanted to make a run for his wife and daughter in Price Hill. Teresa wanted to try for Newport while there was daylight. Jeff argued that moving without information was gambling, but he was losing authority by the hour because authority above him had vanished. The accounting women left together around 2 p.m. carrying kitchen knives from the break room and a printout of side streets. I never learned what happened to them. That evening, I went back downstairs to the records room and spread out the photographs I had taken of the tunnel drawings. The unfinished subway stations were there, the main right-of-way under Central Parkway clear enough, but what caught my eye was a notation on one margin referencing a later utility access revision from 1963. A secondary hatch, maintenance crossover, non-public entrance. The annotation did not appear on the cleaned-up digital copy we usually used. It lived only on the old paper markups, in grease pencil and faded blue ink. Most people imagine old infrastructure as a neat map. It is not neat. It is layers of argument, original design, field change, emergency fix, budget cut, unauthorized patch, contractor note, maintenance note contradicting, contractor note. Somebody writes closed and 30 years later somebody else writes temp access beside it because they need to pull cable. The city forgets. The people doing the work do not. I remembered a bricked-over wall in a sub-basement storage corridor 1 level below our records room. It had always looked wrong to me. newer than the surrounding concrete, as if it had closed off something larger. I'd knocked on it once months earlier and heard a hollow return. That night, while Jeff tried to raise somebody at the county emergency management office and Teresa inventoried vending machine snacks like an accountant balancing the end of civilization, I took a flashlight, a pry bar, a hammer, and a respirator mask from our field kit and went down. The sub-basement smelled like dust, old mop water, and hot electrical insulation. There were pipe runs overhead, cast iron and copper and newer PVC additions, all labeled with peeling tape. I found the wall at the end of the corridor behind stacks of metal shelving and holiday decorations from the building association. Once I moved the shelves, the repair line was obvious. Different mortar, different brick, no signage. I tapped it with the hammer. Hollow. I went back upstairs and got Malik. He looked at the wall, then at me. And this matters because if the streets stay bad, we need another way out, or another place to be. He rubbed his face. He had not shaved in 2 days. You sure it's not just dead space? No. Great. We worked quietly for 40 minutes, knocking out enough brick to reveal blackness beyond and a rush of old, stale air that smelled like cold stone and rust. I shined my light through the gap and saw concrete on the other side, not dirt. A corridor, arched ceiling, utility brackets on one wall. Malik let out a low whistle. You're kidding? We widened the opening enough to squeeze through. The corridor beyond ran north-south, maybe 8 feet wide, poured concrete with water staining, decades of mineral tracks, and a floor littered with broken insulators, old cable ties, and dry rat droppings. There was no power, but there had been once. Conduit racks still clung to the wall. 30 yards in, the corridor opened onto something much larger. I stepped out first and felt my flashlight disappear into space. It was one of the unfinished station chambers or something connected to one, larger than I expected even knowing what I might find. Curved concrete ceiling, twin recesses where platform edges would have been. Old trackbed area, though no rails remained in that section. The air was cool and still, maybe the low 60s. Sound moved strangely. Even our breathing bounced back at us. On the far wall, faded paint and stenciled numbers marked utility zones added long after the original tunnel work stopped. Jesus, Malik whispered. That was the moment everything shifted for me. Not because I thought we had found safety, yet because I understood we had found distance. In a city where danger was happening at street level, we had found several hundred feet of concrete and earth between us and the noise. We brought Jeff and Teresa down. Jeff stared into the chamber for a long time, then asked the first practical question. Ventilation? Has to be some, I said, or we'd smell stagnation worse than this. Flood risk? Depends on grade, drains, connected systems. People already in here? That was the right question. We listened. Nothing. The next few hours were the last normal hours I remember. Not normal because the world was normal. Normal because we still believed we had options. We brought down supplies from the office, bottled water, canned soup from the break room, power banks, flashlights, a first aid kit, duct tape, contractor garbage bags, site maps, and a hand truck, 2 foldable tables, and a box of bright orange traffic cones because they were there and people grab what their jobs teach them matters. Malik made another run to his truck and brought back the pistol, 3 spare magazines, a tire iron, a road flare kit, and a small medical pouch. Teresa found blankets from an emergency cabinet in the tenant association office. Jeff filled plastic bins with copier paper because he said dry paper was currency in any bad situation. He was right for reasons none of us expected. We sealed the broken brick opening from the tunnel side as best we could using shelving, tarps, and debris. Not to stop somebody determined, just to prevent light spill and casual discovery. Then we set up in the larger chamber near an old maintenance alcove. That first night underground, and I slept better than I had in 2 days. That should sound comforting. It was not. What let me sleep was the absence of people. By the 5th day, the surface had become a machine for bad surprises. The city above us was still there, but it no longer worked like a city. Small groups moved fast, not in crowds, but in bursts. Sirens had grown less frequent. Smoke columns started appearing in different parts of the skyline visible from rooftop edges. We took turns making short daylight trips to the surface through the office building for supplies and information. Every trip got worse. The thing people get wrong when they tell stories like this is they make the change immediate. It was not immediate. The city did not go silent all at once. It degraded. Traffic lights still changed above empty intersections. Elevator music still played in one lobby while a man pounded his forehead against a locked door outside. A bus sat at a stop with the route display lit and no driver in the seat. An office printer somewhere above us kept spitting the same half-finished page over and over until the paper tray emptied. Systems outlast meaning. We learned fast that underground living is less about hiding than about managing needs. Air, water, light, waste, noise discipline, time. Once you deal with those, then you can worry about food, security, and whether your mind is holding together. The tunnel gave us advantages, but it also made every problem more technical. We could not simply exist there and hope. We had to make the place livable. I spent the next 2 days exploring with Malik and Teresa while Jeff stayed near our base and kept notes. We found side corridors, cable chases, maintenance platforms, old equipment rooms stripped down to anchors and empty panels, and, most important, 2 vertical access shafts. One was blocked under a welded street grate somewhere near Central Parkway. The other connected to a service basement in a boarded building several blocks away. That second route became our lifeline. We also found drain channels still working. A little water moved through them, not clean enough to trust, but moving. That meant the lower sections had not flooded in years. Good sign. We found a room with ancient vent fans, long dead, but their shafts still allowed a faint current of outside air. We found electrical conduit runs that could be repurposed as cable pathways if we ever got power. Yeah, we found an old steel door with a municipal seal from the 70s, and behind it a chamber full of abandoned shelving, cracked hard hats, road salt buckets, and a hand-operated pallet jack. Treasure, in the first week definition of treasure. On one wall, near a junction, somebody decades earlier had stenciled Station 4A, access restricted in black block letters. Beneath that, in white paint from a later era, another crew had added maintenance only. Teresa looked at it and said, "We should name sections." Jeff agreed. If we're staying here, we stop calling everything that room and the other room. So we did. The large chamber became main hall. The alcove where we slept became berth. The equipment room with shelves became stores. The old fan room became airhouse. The service basement route became north exit. And the blocked shaft became the street cap. Naming things made the place real in a way maps alone could not. On the 7th day, we brought in our first outsider. His name was Ben Kessler, 42, former Metro bus mechanic. We found him sitting in the service basement at north exit with a wrench across his knees and a bite mark on his jacket sleeve that had not broken skin. He looked at our lights and raised the wrench halfway, then lowered it when he saw we were not coming in fast. "You with the city?" he asked. "No," I said. "Contractors." He gave a tired laugh. "Close enough." Ben had holed up for 2 nights in the building above the basement after losing contact with his brother. He had seen us on a previous supply run and followed at a distance until he found the access point. He knew some of the underground transit history, and enough that when I asked what he did before all this, his eyes went to the tunnel behind me and he said, "Spent 20 years keeping dead vehicles alive. This place feels familiar." Jeff wanted to turn him away. Malik wanted to at least search him and hear him out. Teresa stood between both positions the way she always did when strong opinions started hardening into mistakes. We either become the kind of place people can join, she said quietly, or we become 4 people waiting to fail alone. 5, Ben said. She did not smile. Not yet. We brought him in, searched his bag, checked him for injuries, and gave him rules before we gave him food. No wandering without a partner. No loud voices. No open flames outside designated area. Waste procedures are not optional. If you feel sick, you say it immediately. If you hear something, you do not investigate alone. Ben listened without arguing. Good sign. By the end of the 2nd week, we were 6. The 6th was a nurse named Andrea Salcedo, 31, who had been cut off from Christ Hospital while trying to reach her father in Camp Washington. She knew enough emergency medicine to be 10 times more useful than any gun, and unlike most people we met in those days, she still spoke like the future existed. She corrected the way we stored medical supplies, improvised a better wash station, and nearly yelled at all of us for the way we were rationing water without properly tracking intake. "You're going to make dumb mistakes because you're tired," she said, writing dates and names on a clipboard salvaged from stores. So we stop trusting memory. Everything gets logged. That became law underground. Logs for water. Logs for food, logs for entry and exit, logs for battery charge cycles, logs for latrine maintenance, logs for sightings near north exit, logs for coughs, fevers, cuts, and scrapes. Civilization reduced itself to note-taking, and that was still better than chaos. The tunnel system itself kept expanding in our understanding. There was the unfinished subway main line under Central Parkway, yes, but there were also later service penetrations connecting to utility corridors, maintenance crossovers under older buildings, patched access runs, and at least one storm-adjacent chamber we sealed off immediately when we saw watermarks too high on the wall. Forgotten tunnel system was the right phrase, but not because it had been hidden like treasure. It had been neglected by so many different owners over so many different decades that no one person remembered the whole thing. That was enough. The question people always ask is why I never left once I got down there. The answer is that I did leave, at first. Many times. I just came back every time because the surface was becoming less survivable while the tunnel became more organized. During week 3, we made our most dangerous supply run. A grocery distribution truck had been abandoned near Reading Road, jackknifed partly across an access lane beside a loading area. Ben thought there might still be product in it if no one had managed to open the rear. We approached before dawn through alleys, moving slowly, listening at every corner. I carried a carpenter's hammer and a crowbar. Malik had the pistol. Ben had a 4-cell maglite heavy enough to count as a club. Teresa stayed at North Exit as our timekeeper and fallback. The truck had been hit, but not looted thoroughly. We got dry goods, canned vegetables, paper towels, plastic wrap, and, most valuable of all, sealed jugs of distilled water intended for some store display humidifier system. Not a miracle haul, but enough to justify the risk. On the way back, we saw one of the infected close for the first time in full daylight. I'm not going to describe it the way movies do. No snarling monster, no dramatic transformation. It was a woman in office clothes with one shoe missing, walking too fast in an uneven line, head turning in short, mechanical motions as if sound caught her before sight. There was dried blood on one cuff that might not even have been hers. What mattered was the way she committed to movement once she noticed us. No warning, no hesitation, just direct intent. Malik fired once at close range and missed because he was moving backward. The sound under those loading docks hit like a grenade. Ben slammed a steel cart between us and her. I caught the side handle, and together we shoved hard enough to tangle her feet. She went down. We ran. That was the lesson. Not heroics, not clean engagements, distance. When we got back underground, nobody talked for several minutes. Then Jeff wrote in the incident log, "Avoid enclosed surface engagements. Sound carries. Ammunition finite. Priority remains withdrawal." That sentence shaped everything that followed. We were not building a fortress in the dramatic sense. We were building a system that let us avoid dramatic moments. We improved North Exit first. The boarded building above it had once been some kind of light industrial warehouse with a freight basement and a freight elevator long out of service. We reinforced the basement side of the access point with shelving and chain-link panels scavenged from a storage cage. We created a false dead end by stacking broken pallets and dusty office furniture in the visible corridor above. We rigged a line of loose metal washers on wire as a silent alarm of sorts, not because it would stop anyone, but because in darkness, small sounds matter. Ben rebuilt an old hasp into a working latch. Teresa painted directional marks in tiny, shielded arrows visible only in flashlight beams. Andrea organized quarantine space in a side room we hoped never to use. Jeff made maps. That was his gift. Not bravery. Not leadership speeches. Clear diagrams. He took my field notes, old plans, and our exploratory walks and turned them into layered, usable maps with pencil codes for risk, airflow, footing quality, and sound behavior. He noted places where voices echoed, where water dripped, where concrete spalled, where rats seemed most active, where a person could hide, where two people could not pass easily, where a light visible from one junction might be seen from another. He was turning an abandoned space into something legible, and legibility is a kind of safety. We lost Evan in week 4. He had left on the second day before we fully committed underground, saying he was going to his parents in Mason. One afternoon he stumbled into North Exit, delirious, dehydrated, and half-conscious. Andrea got him stabilized enough to speak. He had not reached Mason. He had been moving between shelters, then hiding alone. He kept saying he should not have left. Jeff sat with him for hours. Evan died that night from sepsis related to a wound on his calf that had gone untreated too long. Not infection from a bite, not anything dramatic. A dirty wound, fever, no antibiotics in time. Andrea cried in Air House where she thought nobody could hear her. We faced another problem then, one that no one wanted to say out loud. What do you do with a body underground? That is the kind of question that strips away fantasy. There are no good choices, only choices that preserve health and decency as far as possible. We wrapped Evan in contractor plastic and blankets, moved him before dawn through North Exit, and buried him in a shallow service yard under broken asphalt and weeds, because it was the best we could do without drawing attention. Jeff wrote his name, date, and location on 3 copies of paper, sealed one in plastic in stores, one in his own notebook, and one in a coffee can we buried with Evan. He said, "If anything remains of records, then records remain." After that, nobody talked casually about going back up for good. The tunnel changed us by degrees. Our sleep shifted, our hearing sharpened. We started knowing people by footstep pace and flashlight habits. The air carried constant mineral cold that got into clothing and joints. We stopped noticing the smell unless we came in fresh from the surface, then the mixture hit you again. Wet concrete, rust, old dust, bleach, canned food, stale fabric, battery acid, and the faint earthy smell of long-sealed places breathing through cracks. Time had to be forced to exist underground. Teresa built schedules on clipped sheets of copier paper. Day watch, sleep rotation, water checks, North Exit inspection, air house inspection, food prep, quiet hours, maintenance, even exercise, because Andrea insisted sitting still in a tunnel would destroy us almost as surely as anything upstairs. Ben set up a pedal generator from parts pulled off abandoned maintenance equipment and an exercise bike found in the basement warehouse. It did not do much, but it could top off radios and LED lamps if someone worked long enough. We treated electricity like a crop. During the second month, word spread about us without us meaning it to. We had survived long enough for patterns to form. A hidden place. People below downtown. Clean water sometimes available. Medical help. Rules. Some came asking. Some came sneaking. Some came desperate. That was when the real danger started. Our first confrontation with the living happened at North Exit. 3 men had tracked one of our scavenging parties and found the boarded building. They came in after dark with headlamps, bolt cutters, and the confidence of people who had not yet learned how dangerous enclosed spaces make every mistake. Ben heard the washers on the wire and froze everyone with one raised hand. We killed all lights and held our positions at the inner barrier while the men moved debris in the corridor above, whispering to each other. One of them called down, "We know someone's here." Jeff looked at Malik. Malik looked at me. No one answered. Then the man said, "We're not here to hurt anybody. We just need supplies." That line had become meaningless by then. Teresa wrote a note on a scrap of cardboard and slid it down the corridor attached to a length of wire. "Leave. This access is unsafe. Structural failure risk." It was a bluff, but a plausible one in an old basement. The men debated. One laughed, another kicked something. Then we heard the metallic click of cutters. Malik whispered, "If they breach, I can't hold them alone." Andrea said, "Then they don't breach." Ben grinned in the dark with a mechanic's kind of confidence and disappeared toward the old electrical room. 30 seconds later, a horrible cracking bang rolled down the corridor, followed by a shower of dust. He had tripped a stack of unsecured metal ducting and old panel covers we had positioned for exactly that purpose. The noise in that enclosed run sounded like part of the building had started coming apart. The men ran. After that, we made North Exit look even less appealing. More debris, more dust, faked caution tape, a painted warning about asbestos contamination. Ben said, "People are braver than smart, but not always braver than paperwork." He was right again. By autumn, if you can call it autumn when you live mostly without sky, we had built something that no longer felt temporary. A kitchen area with stern fuel rules, a sleeping section divided by hanging tarps for privacy, a tool bench, a ration wall, a battery shelf, a clinic corner. Andrea kept cleaner than the rest of the tunnel seemed to allow. Jeff's map board, a message board with names of the missing and the routes last used to search for them. Ben even got one string of salvaged low-voltage LED work lights running off a mixed battery bank for 2 hours each evening. When those lights came on for the first time, soft white in a place built for darkness, Teresa laughed like she had forgotten how. We were not comfortable. Comfort is the wrong word. But we were functioning. Then Leah found me. I had kept looking for my sister whenever we could spare the risk. She lived in Covington before everything fell apart, worked nights as a respiratory therapist, and was tougher than me in every way that counts. I had not heard from her after the first night text. By then, the bridges felt like separate countries. We left signs in agreed places, notes sealed in plastic behind loose bricks and utility boxes, the kind of dead drop system siblings invent from bad movies when phones fail. And for weeks, nothing. Then, one afternoon, I came back to Main Hall and saw Teresa standing with a woman in a hospital jacket 3 sizes too big and a homemade spear shaft cut from a mop handle. My sister looked thinner, harder, and older, but she was alive. "You look terrible," Leah said. I hugged her so hard my chest hurt. "You too." She had crossed over on foot with a group weeks earlier, lost them, sheltered in a church basement, then followed one of our marks near an old service entrance we had used once and abandoned. She had not come alone. With her were 2 others, Curtis Bell, a former building engineer from a hotel near Fountain Square, and Mina Hargrove, a graduate student from UC who had survived by moving between campus maintenance spaces. Both proved useful almost immediately. And Curtis understood HVAC systems and pumps better than any of us. Mina had a brain for inventory and pattern recognition that made Teresa look relieved for the first time in months. More people meant more strain, but also more skill. That is the balance every survivor group has to solve, and most fail because they only count mouths, not hands. With Curtis's help, we improved airflow through one of the old vent shafts using hand-built dampers and a scavenged inline fan assembly adapted to our battery system. It was not pretty, but it changed the feel of Main Hall. Less stagnant, less cave-like, more survivable. Mina reorganized stores so completely that within 3 days we stopped losing time hunting for things. Leah worked beside Andrea and doubled our medical competence overnight. That should be the point where the story turns hopeful. It did not. Winter brought people down. Not many at first. A man with frostbitten fingers, a woman with a child and no plan beyond the next hour. 2 brothers from Walnut Hills who had been hiding in an office tower mechanical floor. Every one of them forced the same argument. Do we stay hidden and preserve what we have, or become what the surface needs and risk being overrun? Jeff leaned toward caution. Teresa leaned toward controlled admission. Leah surprised me by being harder than both. "You can't save everyone," she said. "You can barely save the people you have." "That's not the same as closing the door," Andrea replied. "No," Leah said. "It's worse. It's pretending you can open it without consequences." We developed screening rules. Observation period. Tool contribution if possible. Skill assessment. Behavioral assessment. No one learned the full map at once. No one went near stores or batteries unsupervised. It sounded cold, but cold systems beat warm mistakes. Enough people passed through us that rumors spread wider. The tunnel under downtown. The station below the parkway. The people with clean bandages. The people with light. We never used the word community. It felt too easy. We used the word station sometimes. Ben liked that, said it sounded like transit still existed. The infected did not stop being a problem just because we stayed below. Sound travels through cities in ways people do not notice until danger teaches them. There were days when impacts above one shaft came down like drum beats. There were nights when something or someone moved over the street cap for hours, scraping metal. Once, in late January, as a group of infected somehow entered a side service corridor through a breached basement connection several hundred yards from Main Hall. We heard them before we saw them. Fast footfalls, erratic collisions with walls, breathing amplified by concrete. We did not stand and fight. We had rehearsed for this. Lights out except for shielded lamps. Fall back to Junction B. Noise lure to flood cut-off corridor. Ben triggered the lure by rolling a toolbox full of scrap down the side passage. The sound pulled them exactly where he hoped. When the last one entered the low corridor, Curtis and I dropped the gate we had salvaged from an old caged storage bay. Not strong enough to be permanent, but enough to tangle and delay. Then Malik and I sealed the service door beyond with expanding foam, wedge bars, and every heavy object we could move. It held. Afterward, trembling with adrenaline, Teresa looked at the chalkboard where our procedures were written and said, "That's why we do drills." By the second year, nobody above would have called what remained a city, but enough life persisted to make the surface dangerous and tempting at the same time. Small settlements formed and broke. Fires changed street routes. Buildings became landmarks not by names but by functions. The pharmacy with the broken awning, the parking garage with the blue tarp, the church with the generator, the empty school, the apartment tower where windows were covered in office chairs. We traded sometimes. Batteries for antibiotics, filter media for canned food, hand tools for soap. Leah hated the trade runs. Ben lived for them. Jeff went only when mapping required it. And I went because I knew the ground, and because by then the tunnel felt more like home than any room with windows. That is the piece people misunderstand. I did not become trapped underground. I became adapted to it. Above ground, every horizon meant exposure. Every open street meant being seen. Every night in a room with windows meant worrying who was looking in, human or otherwise. Underground, danger was narrower. It came through known routes, predictable choke points, mapped uncertainties. A tunnel can kill you faster than a field if you are careless, but if you know your tunnel, it becomes a kind of machine you can manage. I started sleeping poorly on the surface during long runs. Too much sky, too much wind, too many angles. Down below, with concrete over me and the low hum of our fan system and the faint clink of somebody on late watch, my body believed in tomorrow. Years blur in memory when seasons reach you only as temperature changes in shafts and the type of coat people carry in from above. Jeff died in the 3rd year from a stroke at his mapboard, pencil still in hand. We buried him beside Evan in the same overgrown service yard, and I put one of his folded tunnel maps in the coffee can. Ben lost hearing in one ear after a generator backfire underground and never admitted it openly. Teresa became what Jeff had been and more: organizer, judge, keeper of rules. Leah trained younger arrivals in respiratory care and infection control like she was running a field hospital in a world too tired to deserve it. Andrea eventually led the station entirely, and though she would deny that, leaders underground are often the people who keep others alive long enough to argue. As for me, I stopped counting the exact number of times I went topside and instead counted how often I wanted to remain there. The answer grew smaller every year. I found reasons, of course, practical ones. The tunnel needed maintenance. New surface groups were unstable. Weather exposure was getting harder as I got older. The station had become too important to abandon. All true. But the deepest truth was simpler. The man who had walked into that hidden corridor with a flashlight and a pry bar on the 4th day had expected to use the tunnel as a pause. The man I became understood it as a place. A real place, not a myth, not a bunker fantasy. A network of aging concrete, patched conduits, vent shafts, cross passages, to maintenance rooms, improvised doors, handwritten signs, water logs, battery shelves, clinic charts, names on walls, and people who learned how to live inside a forgotten piece of a city because the remembered parts failed first. The last time I stayed above ground overnight was during a scouting trip west of downtown in what used to be spring, though the air still cut cold after sunset. Curtis and I had gone to inspect a rumored pump room connection beneath a shuttered warehouse that might have linked to our lower drainage corridor. We found the connection collapsed and the warehouse occupied by a loose trading post that smelled like wood smoke, diesel, and too many people in too little space. They offered us floor room for the night. I lay there listening to men cough and babies fuss and boards creak under footsteps above. And I realized every noise felt uncontained. Too many unknowns, too many entry points. In the dark, I found myself counting concrete thickness as if walls could tell me their weight. They could not. I did not sleep. At dawn, on the walk back, Curtis glanced over and said, "You know you breathe easier when we're going down." I know. You ever think that's strange? Every day. He nodded like that answered it. Years later, when new arrivals asked for the story of how the station was found, different people told different versions. Ben made it sound like an urban exploration accident. Teresa made it sound like a paperwork miracle. Leah said the tunnel was there because cities are built by people who always leave more behind than they admit. Andrea told the practical version, which was that 4 stubborn office workers found shelter and then did not waste it. My version is this: the city did not end all at once. It shed functions, then certainty, then mercy. We went below because below was available and above was failing. We stayed because systems matter. A hidden corridor became a route became a base became a station became a life. I found a forgotten underground tunnel system during the outbreak, and I never really left because every time I climbed back to the surface, I was reminded that surviving is not about where the light is, it is about where the risks make sense. Under Central Parkway, inside the unfinished concrete skeleton of a project the city gave up on almost a century earlier, we made something understandable. Not easy, not safe in any perfect way, just understandable. And that is rarer than people think. Even now, if you walk downtown Cincinnati and stand above the old subway alignment, you would never guess how much history sits under your feet. You would see traffic, storefronts, brick, glass, buses, crosswalks, maybe a few empty upper windows in old buildings that once had better days. You would not see the sealed basement corridor behind the shelving, or the faded stencils in Station 4A, or the pencil maps Jeff left pinned in plastic sleeves, or the clinic shelves Leah and Andrea built out of scavenged brackets, or the battery bank Ben swore at every winter, or the clipboards Teresa labeled in perfect block letters. You would not hear the washers on wire at North Exit, or the fan in Air House, or the scrape of boots on concrete from the late watchmaking rounds. That is fine. Most of the most important parts of a city have always been the parts people do not see. I am older now than I was meant to get in those first weeks. My knees complain on stairs. My left shoulder aches in cold weather from hauling too many things through too many narrow corridors. I still keep paper maps because paper never needs charging. I still mark dates carefully because losing track of time is one of the first ways a person becomes less than themselves. We still maintain the station. We still send people up when we must. We still add notes to the wall when routes change, when shafts settle, when a building above becomes unsafe, when a new group can be trusted, when one cannot. The tunnel is not frozen in the day I found it. It is a living part of whatever remains. Sometimes people ask whether I regret not leaving for good when the roads first emptied, before everything locked down into these smaller, harsher patterns. They mean, do I regret choosing a life under concrete over the chance of some wider horizon? No. I regret people. I regret names in Jeff's notebooks that stopped getting updates. I regret that Evan came back too late. I regret the accounting women whose fates I never learned. I regret every run where we returned with fewer than we left with. I regret that the world forced practical people into making choices that sounded cruel because the alternatives were worse. But I do not regret the tunnel. The tunnel did not save us by magic. It saved us by giving us enough structure to build on. That is a different thing, a more honest thing. It gave us depth, concealment, stable temperature, controlled access, salvageable infrastructure, and a reason to think like engineers instead of prey. It took a forgotten civic failure and let us turn it into a working refuge. That is about as close to hope as I trust. If you want the neat ending, here it is. I found the tunnel on the 4th day, and the tunnel became my address, my job site, my burden, my shelter, and finally my home. I still know every turn from main hall to north exit in total darkness. I still know which wall sweats first when rain is heavy above. I still know where Jeff first stood with that look on his face when he realized the station could be mapped, and where Teresa posted the first ration schedule, and where Leah sat the first night after finding us and fell asleep with her back against a crate because she trusted the place before she trusted the people in it. I never left because leaving stopped making sense. That is the plain truth. I found a forgotten underground tunnel system during the zombie outbreak, and after enough weeks, enough losses, enough repairs, enough names written in logbooks, and enough nights hearing the broken city grind on overhead, I understood something simple. Sometimes the only way to stay alive in a collapsing world is to move into what that world forgot, learn it better than anyone else, and make yourself useful there. That is what I did, and I never left, and... Thanks for listening till the end. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe. It helps keep the channel going and brings more stories your way. Remember, the darkness is always closer than it seems.